Our protagonist, Mujin, isn't just fighting squad leader Chilbian, he is humiliating him. He toys with his opponent like a predator with prey, effortlessly weaving through attacks in midair. Chilbian's face twists in humiliation. Consumed by rage, he roars at our hero to stop playing games and fight like a true warrior. In response, Mujin sinks into his stance. He grips his massive sorta weapon weighing over 200 pounds and lifts it as if it were lighter than a feather. As they collide in a blur of motion, Mujin executes a lightning-fast retraction. He strikes Chilbian's blade with such devastating force that the steel itself screams in protest. Seizing the opening, Mujin unleashes a thunderous punch directly into Chilbian's face. The impact shatters bone and sends the squad leader crashing into the dust. The spectators gasp in disbelief. Never in their wildest dreams did they imagine he possessed such monstrous strength. But how did a supposed weakling achieve such dominance? To understand this miracle, we must rewind to the very beginning. Our protagonist was once the legendary divine demon, a peerless swordsman who stood alone against 9 powerful sect leaders fueled by a burning desire for vengeance. His swordsmanship was not just skilled, it was terrifying, a dance of death that allowed him to stand his ground against the absolute masters of the realm. His blade moved with divine precision, slicing through defenses before his enemies could even comprehend the strike. They were baffled by his transcendent technique. One by one, the masters fell, cut down before they could react. As their numbers dwindled, a chilling realization took hold. They were not fighting a man, but a monster in human skin. Even when the survivors managed to pin him down and drive a blade straight through his heart, he refused to fall. With his dying breath, he dragged them all down to hell with him, forever carving the name Divine Demon into history. As darkness encroached, his life flashed before his eyes. Paradoxically, he felt a wave of peace washing over him. His mission was complete. Memories flooded back. He recalled his days as a troublemaker in the murim, helpless and cornered by 3 young bullies. He was saved by his master, who forged him into a weapon, yet his path became one of endless slaughter, living and dying by the sword. Was this blood-soaked existence truly a life? In that final moment, the image of his late wife drifted into his mind. His only true happiness had been by her side, a fleeting warmth that was cruelly ripped away from him. Tears mingled with blood as he questioned the meaning of his existence. With a heavy heart, the divine demon closed his eyes and embraced the void. Suddenly, the sounds of cursing filled his ears. He assumed he had arrived in hell, but when his eyes snapped open, he found an annoying group of people standing over him, spewing. Our protagonist was utterly bewildered. The scene before him made no sense whatsoever. Beside him stood 2 children. The young boy was fiercely defending his older brother, shouting that they would never surrender their clan's martial arts, while his brother still drew breath. He declared with shaking determination that no matter the cost, the secret techniques must remain within the Yang Ha clan. While our main character tried to process this chaos, the leader of the opposing group smirked and proposed a sinister deal to end their struggles. Addressing our hero as Mujin, he offered a pitiful sum of money, mocking the clan's utter destitution. But there was a catch. Mujin would have to wager his clan's martial arts manuals in a duel. Winner takes all. The little boy froze in terror. He knew the Truth-He's older brother was absolute trash when it came to martial arts. Fed up with the incessant yapping, our protagonist finally snapped. He demanded to know who the hell this Mujin was, knowing full well he was a completely different soul. His alleged siblings stared at him in pure confusion. Their eyes widened as if they were looking at a madman who had lost his mind. Even his rival paused, asking him to repeat himself. When our hero declared himself the divine demon, the crowd erupted in laughter. The rival mocked him, sarcastically suggesting Mujin call him the king of the underworld. This arrogant loudmouth was none other than Chongdobo, the second son of the powerful Chongba merchant group. Mujin's siblings were mortified. They believed his insanity had finally spiraled out of control, causing him to spout absolute gibberish. Even Bukoyan, the master of the merchant group, sneered at the fallen family. He declared their clan finished, claiming their lineage was doomed with a lunatic for an eldest son. Muujin remained stoic, ignoring the insults as he analyzed his situation with a calm, tactical mind. Taking his silence for submission, Dobo smirked. He announced that the duel was set for the following month at the Young Pavilion. Dobo issued a final warning. This agreement was bound by the sacred martial arts code. Breaking it would bring forth severe consequences. As the merchants strutted away, the siblings turned to Muujin in panic. They had been cornered into a duel they couldn't possibly win. To make matters worse, the real Muujin had never even held a sword in his entire life. Yet, our protagonist burst into laughter. They didn't know that for him, the sword was not just a weapon, it was his very soul. He attempted to circulate his internal energy, reaching for his dantian, only to find an empty void. His vast power had completely vanished. Frustration boiled over as the grim reality set in. This new body was not just unconditioned, it was frail, weak, and utterly pathetic. His younger sister collapsed in tears, begging Muujin to snap out of his delusions before they lost everything. The young girl glared at him with venom in her eyes, spitting out the word trash. She mocked him, calling him a pathetic fool for letting those arrogant merchants walk all over him. Her brother tried to intervene, scolding her for such disrespect towards their kin, but she stood her ground. With tears streaming down her face, she screamed that their parents were dead because of Muujin. Before fleeing, the young boy bowed his head, apologizing for her outburst, whispering that her anger sometimes consumes her reason. And with those heavy words hanging in the air, he turned and followed his sister, leaving Muujin alone in the silence. Muujin stood there, utterly bewildered. He could not fathom why his own blood would look at him with such intense hatred, treating him like a raving lunatic. His mind raced. The last thing he remembered was the thrill of battle, mercilessly slaughtering the sect leaders. He should have met a warrior's end, yet here he was, trapped in the frustration boiled over, and he collapsed to the ground. Who were those children? And why did this reality feel so wrong? Suddenly, a panicked figure rushed toward him. It was his attendant, frantically asking why he had ventured outside in such a fragile, broken state. The man claimed to have been worried sick, but Muujin stared at him blankly, demanding to know his identity since he did not recognize a single soul here. Maesok recoiled in shock. He immediately assumed the worst, that the young master was suffering another episode of the madness that had plagued him for years. Believing that Muujin's memory had been wiped by his condition, the loyal servant decided it was time to retell the tragic tale of his life. Once, this body belonged to a prodigy, a genius sought after by the great Orthodox sects. By the age of 23, he was destined to lead the clan to glory. A weary sigh escaped the servant's lips. He had recited this exact story over 6,000 times, praying for a different outcome. Muujin scoffed at the idea. A prodigy? Impossible. His energy core was shattered, completely useless trash. But, more importantly, he demanded answers about this so-called insanity that everyone seemed to whisper about. So, Maesok revealed the dark origin. 17 years ago, Muujin and a rival named Dobo engaged in a friendly spar, swearing on their honor not to use internal energy. At the time, Muujin was merely a child of 6, while Dobo was a boy of 9. The match began innocently enough, but as the exchange heated up, Dobo betrayed their vow. He struck Muujin with a vicious punch, heavily infused with internal force. Hearing this, Muujin felt a surge of disdain. He asked what specific technique had been used to cause such devastation. It was the Seven Wounds Fist, a lethal art used against a defenseless child who had expected a fair contest. Dobo had sneered, boasting that the technique came from the Kong Tong sect, knowing full well the horrific after effects it would inflict on a victim's mind and body. The cruel brat had already tested it on his own arrogant older brother, leaving the man crippled and bedridden. Delighted by the destruction he caused, Dobo was eager to see just how much damage he could inflict on young Muujin. That was the moment everything changed. Muujin was branded a madman, his mind fractured by the lingering curse of the Seven Wounds Fist. A cold fury rose within Muujin. That bastard Dobo had crippled him and now had the audacity to request another duel? Muujin turned to his servant, demanding to know how the clan had retaliated against such treachery. Masok hesitated, then revealed the bitter truth. It was Mujin's own father who had delivered the final judgment. Dobo was not just a cousin. He was the heir to the Qianhua Merchant Group, a powerhouse ranked among the top 10 forces in the Central Plains. Despite the atrocity committed against his own son, Mujin's father bowed to pressure and let the culprit walk away with nothing but a simple warning. Mujin clenched his fists. He could not believe the pathetic weakness of a father who would forgive the monster that destroyed his child's future. "This clan is rotten to the core," he muttered. He then asked the next logical question, "Where are my parents now?" Masok explained that as Mujin's madness worsened, his father desperately sought a cure, drowning the family in insurmountable debt. 9 years ago, the stress claimed his mother's life. 3 years later, his father followed her to the grave, unable to bear the burden any longer. In the eyes of the world, Mujin was the cursed son who had driven his parents to their deaths and dragged the clan into oblivion. The clan's honor crumbled, leaving his younger siblings to suffer in the wreckage of their family's legacy. All that remained were mountains of debt, 2 loyal servants, and a handful of martial artists hanging by a thread. And of course, his younger brother Wadohin and his sister Wasoyon, who bore the brunt of his tragic existence. The weight of Soyeon's hatred finally made sense. That night, under the dim light of a candle, Mujin pored over the history books, piecing together this new reality. A shockwave went through him. 30 years had passed since his previous life. 30 years since he had crushed the 9 great sects. Now, the supreme overlord was trapped in the body of a powerless lunatic. He held no regrets for his past carnage, but looking at this broken family, he decided to embrace his new identity as Mujin and protect these abandoned children. However, the Qianhua Merchant Group stood in his way. They were the architects of this clan's destruction, and they would pay for crippling this body. His first target was clear. The duel with Dobo was 1 month away, and vengeance was overdue. But with a dantian filled with trash, he realized he had to cultivate from the very beginning. He needed to forge this weak vessel into a weapon. He assumed the lotus position, closing his eyes to sense the flow of nature. He smiled, remembering how difficult the path of cultivation had been in his first life, and prepared to rise. Yet fortune seemed to favor this new vessel, gifted with an overwhelming innate martial potential. Mujin seized this wild, chaotic power, pushing his limits until a blinding golden aura erupted, bathing his entire chamber in its radiant glow. But the brilliance was short-lived. Hearing his agonizing roars, Sok and the servants frantically burst into the room. They found him collapsed on the floor. One servant mocked that he might be dead, only to recoil when finding a pulse far stronger than before. Suddenly, Mujin seized the man's collar. He demanded to know why forming a simple energy core racked his body with such hellish torment. The servant trembled in confusion until Mujin clarified his demand. He needed to know the secrets hidden within this flesh. Was there a special bloodline? The terrified servant finally confessed the truth. He possessed the legendary heavenly martial body, a rare, heroic physique blessed by the heavens themselves, found only in the greatest of prodigies. Another wave of agony crashed through Mujin, and the cruel irony struck him. This divine body was the absolute antithesis of his demonic arts. A vessel built for pure, righteous energy would naturally reject the darkness, tearing itself apart if he attempted to cultivate the demonic path. Mujin howled, cursing his luck. Of all the physiques in the world, why was he trapped in the one body that rejected his mastery? The situation was catastrophic. With a life-or-death duel looming in just 1 month, he was effectively crippled. While writhing in the aftermath, he gasped out a question to Sok, demanding the identities of the 2 figures he had seen earlier. Sok revealed their ranks. The man in green was head steward Tubikin, and the one in red was a clan elder named Joanan. The names sparked a distant memory from his past life, but before he could grasp it, the pain overwhelmed his senses, and he plunged into unconsciousness. 3 days drifted by before Mujin finally rose from his bed, ignoring Sok's frantic pleas for him to rest and recover. But Mujin had no patience for idleness. With the duel approaching, he demanded Sok bring him a sword immediately. Sok stifled a bitter laugh. The clan was struggling just to put rice on the table, yet his young master was demanding expensive weaponry? The silence spoke volumes. Mujin was forced to ask the humiliating question. Was the family treasury truly empty? Sok hesitated before confessing. They were surviving on loans from the Bango sect, a notorious faction of the unorthodox path. The interest rates were predatory, and the clan was now drowning in a suffocating ocean of debt. Mujin's eyes narrowed. Before he could restore the clan's martial glory, he had to secure its financial survival. A dangerous smirk formed on his lips. If they were already drowning, what was the harm in diving deeper? He would take out another loan. Sok panicked, but Mujin silenced him with a sharp command. He ordered a letter sent to the elders while he went for a little stroll. Panic swept through the elders when they learned the truth. Their young master was walking straight into the Lion's Den Bango sect headquarters. Before long, Mujin and a trembling Sok stood before the imposing gates of the Bango stronghold. Mujin ordered the burly gatekeeper to fetch his boss, but the guard, Khan, wasn't impressed, sneering that they should only enter if they were there to gamble. Mujin didn't flinch, insisting on seeing the leader. His arrogance began to ignite Khan's temper. Sok jumped in, waving his hands desperately. He begged the guard for mercy, claiming his young master wasn't right in the head. The tension threatened to explode until a commanding voice cut through the air. Vice Master Ma Hungbo had arrived to investigate the disturbance. Khan immediately bowed, reporting that this brat was demanding an audience with the sect leader himself. Ma eyed the boy with curiosity, asking his purpose. Mujin simply smiled. He was there to borrow more money. A predatory glint flashed in Ma's eyes. He assured Mujin that he could handle such matters personally and invited them inside. They crossed a creaking wooden bridge, delving deeper into the mansion, flanked on all sides by heavily armed swordsmen. Sok's nerves were fraying. He whispered urgently to Mujin, begging him to turn back before it was too late. But Mujin remained unfazed. They had come too far to retreat now. Sok stammered out a rumor. An old woman had once witnessed the sect leader fight, claiming he decimated his opponent in mere seconds. The leader wasn't just a thug. He was a true martial artist who had mastered a lethal, one-hit killing technique. Mujin was about to question Sok's timing when Ma interrupted them, praising the servant's sharp intuition. But the warning came too late. They had already been led into the bowels of the compound, deep within a cavernous hall. In an instant, the trap snapped shut, and a circle of steel closed around them. Mujin sighed, looking more disappointed than afraid. He asked Ma if this cowardly ambush was his plan all along. Ma's grin turned sinister as he confirmed the treachery. He couldn't touch a noble in public, so he had led the lamb to the slaughterhouse. He wasn't about to let Mujin escape their clutches. Sok fell to his knees, not fighting, but desperately begging them to spare his young master's life. Rage flared in Mujin's eyes at the mention of parents, a raw nerve exposed. But the reality hit him cold. He was an orphan, and suddenly the realization struck that he was inhabiting a stranger's flesh. With the stage set for violence, Ma signaled his dogs to break the boy and teach him his place. Eager for blood, a thug launched a killing blow. Sok turned pale, watching death hurtle straight toward his master. But a thunderous crack echoed. Mujin caught the fist, pulverizing the attacker's bones from the inside out. The thug crumpled to the floor, screaming that dark magic was at play. Mujin merely sneered, mocking the man's pathetic, tofu-like fragility, despite his massive size. Still, a realization hit the protagonist. Without his original internal energy, he had to rely on pure technique to survive. Furious at the delay, Ma barked for a slaughter, ordering the rest to finish the job. Steel flashed as a swordsman charged, but Mujin flowed around the blade like water, knowing he couldn't match their brute force yet. Utilizing his body's newfound flexibility, he danced out of harm's way and delivered a skull-crushing headbutt that silenced the attacker instantly. The man fell back wailing, but another blade sliced the air. Mujin dodged the slash with a hair's breadth to spare. The assassin tried a follow-up strike, but Mujin backstepped before launching a devastating kick that knocked the soul out of him. Before the squad could comprehend the gap in skill, they were being toyed with, and soon every single one was kneeling in the dirt. Watching from the sidelines, Sok cried out in worry, but Mujin just scoffed, calling his servant a fool for doubting him. Awed by the display, Sok stammered, demanding to know the origin of such divine martial arts. Mujin paused. He simply smirked, claiming it was nothing but street survival instincts a lie to cover his legendary past. Sok was baffled, but Ma clapped sarcastically before flicking a coin with lethal force. It grazed Mujin's temple warning shot, loaded with terrifying internal energy that actually startled him. Dismissing his useless lackeys, Ma stepped forward, his aura flaring with murderous intent to handle this personally. Mujin sighed, feigning innocence. He only sought a peaceful audience with the leader. Scum like you don't deserve to breathe the same air as the boss. Ma spat with venom. Unsheathing his blade, the enforcer lunged, aiming to cleave Mujin in two with a single strike. Clang! In a defiance of physics, Mujin parried the steel blade with nothing but a pair of wooden chopsticks. Ma's eyes bulged in shock, unaware that poverty left the hero no other choice of weapon. Sparks flew as wood clashed with steel, but Mujin stood his ground, his martial arts transcending the material world. In a blink, a chopstick pierced Ma's hand like a spear, drawing first blood. The enforcer gasped, unable to comprehend how a commoner found an opening in his ultimate defense. Mujin laughed, treating the duel like a game, warning him that underestimating dinner utensils would be his undoing. Ma found himself struggling against mere wood, his mind reeling because Mujin was supposed to be a piece of trash with no key. How could he reach such a terrifying realm of mastery? In such a short time? Ma refused to believe this monster was the same person he knew. Mujin continued to strike pressure points with the chopsticks, taunting the man's sloppy form. Roaring in denial, Ma leaped high, channeling all his power into one final, desperate aerial slash. But Mujin stood like a mountain, unimpressed. He slipped past the attack effortlessly, leaving Ma wide open. Who is this guy? Ma thought, panic finally setting in as he realized the depth of Mujin's hidden strength. A fist buried itself in Ma's gut, shattering his ribs and his ego, replacing arrogance with primal fear. I just want a loan, Mujin whispered, his smile radiating the terrifying aura of a demon king. Broken and beaten, Ma finally submitted to the superior predator after the thorough thrashing. Even the guards kowtowed as their leader begged for mercy, ready to spill his secrets. Mujin's gaze turned cold. Why lend to my family without collateral? I smell a trap behind this generosity. Ma swore it was pure goodwill, trying desperately to hide his trembling hands. But Mujin wasn't a fool. The thick stench of deceit and terror coming from Ma told a completely different story. Mujin narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping to a freezing whisper as he offered the man one final chance to choose his words wisely or face the consequences. Realizing the young master's killing intent was genuine, Ma crumbled under the pressure, finally confessing that the strings were being pulled by the shadowed hands of the Chongba merchant group. A spark of recognition flashed in Mujin's eyes. He had suspected the merchant group's dirty fingerprints were all over this scheme, but hearing it confirmed was a different matter entirely. He demanded the terms of their dark bargain. When Ma hesitated, Mujin made it crystal clear. Die protecting a corrupt merchant group, and not a single soul would mourn his passing. The threat pierced through Ma's defenses, forcing the terrifying truth to spill from his trembling lips. The orders were malicious and precise. Lend Mujin's clan unlimited funds, but attach an interest rate so predatory it would shackle them for eternity. It was a trap to annihilate the Wan clan. Once they were wiped from the political chessboard, the Bango sect would swoop in to claim their ancestral lands as the prize. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Mujin realized the family's sacred territory had been the true target of their greed from the very beginning. With a cold smirk, Mujin demanded to know the cost of the devil's deal. How much would 300 gold coins swell to in just 1 year? The numbers were sickening. According to the contract, Ma revealed that the principal sum would explode into a crippling debt of 5,000 gold coins. Disgust churned in his gut, yet Mujin's expression remained unbothered. To everyone's shock, he simply nodded and accepted the exorbitant terms without blinking. His gaze sharpened like a blade as he asked who handled their dirty work. Ma whispered the name of their enforcers, the Four Martial Heavens, a dark alliance of unorthodox sects. Mujin froze. The name struck a nerve, though his subordinate, Sok, was confused, noting that such an alliance was merely a rumor in the current era. A surge of irritation flared within Mujin. The mere mention of the Four Martial Heavens forced a curse from his lips as memories of their wretched existence resurfaced. Sok watched his master with concern, convinced the stress had driven him mad. How could he curse an enemy he had theoretically never met in this lifetime? Waving off the concern, Mujin told Sok to save his brain power. He wasn't in the mood to explain the complexities of his past life or the future threats looming ahead. His patience wearing thin, Mujin snapped back to the present, demanding the whereabouts of the courier sent to fetch the gold. As if summoned by his wrath, the lackey finally returned, struggling under the weight of a chest filled with 300 shimmering gold coins. The killing intent vanished instantly, replaced by sheer avarice. Mujin's eyes sparkled at the sight of the treasure that would fund his grand plan. He signaled it was time to move. When Sok tried to protest the insane loan terms, Mujin silenced him with a glare, ordering him to grab the loot and keep his mouth shut. Ma and his guards hurriedly escorted the terrifying guest to the exit, desperate to see the back of him. Before leaving, Mujin commanded Ma to mark the date in blood. He vowed to settle every copper of the clan's debt once he finished his business with the Kenyua merchant group. But his final words were a warning, sharp as a dagger. He cautioned Ma about the consequences of squeezing blood from stones and extorting the common folk. Ma bowed low, feigning obedience, but beneath his submissive mask, he was screaming curses, vowing that Mujin would pay for this humiliation. While Ma fantasized about his downfall, Mujin and Sok arrived back at the estate, where the two clan elders were waiting with bated breath. Panic seized the old men when they spotted fresh blood splattered across Mujin's robes, but he calmly assured them that none of the crimson stains belonged to him. When pressed about the violence at the sect, Mujin shrugged it off casually, claiming he had simply gone for a polite negotiation to secure a loan. He declared that the clan needed capital immediately. If they couldn't feed their starving warriors, the few loyal swords they had left would abandon them before the war even began. The elders exchanged skeptical glances. They couldn't fathom a sect lending money to a ruined clan and assumed their young master had resorted to banditry. Mujin rolled his eyes at their lack of faith, insisting that every coin was accounted for in the sect's ledger, legitimate and binding. Turning serious, he gave the elders a specific directive: use the funds to care for his younger siblings, ensuring they were well fed and clothed like nobility. With his commands issued, he didn't wait for a debate. He simply wished them luck with the logistics and strode away toward his next destination. Mujin found himself standing in the solemn silence of the ancestral hall. Having been an orphan in his past life, speaking to parents felt strange and foreign to his warrior soul. Finally finding his voice, he addressed the spirits, reporting that the clan's financial crisis was averted and swearing a blood oath to protect the siblings he had inherited. He bowed respectfully, urging the departed souls to find peace in the afterlife while he handled the chaos of the living world. He also made a grim promise to utterly crush Dobo in their upcoming duel. Unbeknownst to him, two pairs of awestruck eyes were watching from the shadows, Sun and Dohin. The children gazed at their big brother with newfound hero worship. Later that day, Mujin's special order arrived 3 training swords of monstrous weight, 50, 80, and 110 kilograms. The servants nearly collapsed under the crushing mass of the iron, but Mujin grinned like a maniac, delighted that his tools for ascension had finally arrived. Sok looked at the metal slabs in disbelief, forced to ask what on earth the young master planned to do with weapons that no normal human could lift. A devilish smile curled on Mujin's lips as he gave the only answer that mattered to a martial artist. He was going to swing them until his hands bled. Brimming with confidence, he reached for the lightest blade the 50-kilogram sword intending to whip it around as a warm-up. But reality hit him harder than a fist. His confident smirk vanished the moment he realized the sword wouldn't budge an inch. He cursed this weak, uncultivated body as absolute trash. Refusing to accept defeat, he engaged every muscle, barely managing to lift it using a two-handed grip. Catching Sok staring at him with a mix of pity and judgment, Mujin barked at him to stop gawking and go prepare a feast. He roared for extra meat to fuel his muscle growth, leaving Sok to walk away, shaking his head and wondering if his master had truly lost his mind. Muhin gripped his blade. The crushing weight of his fate pressing down on his shoulder shade had mere weeks to forge a heart of steel before the duel. It was a cruel irony. His heavenly martial body was the complete polar opposite of the dark demonic arts his master had drilled into him. But a path to survival appeared. He had to master the legendary technique of his master's rival, the unrivaled 9 swords. Surrender was not an option. With a roar of determination, he began swinging his blade, his ferocity shaking the very foundations of the house. Meanwhile, whispers reached Dobo in the shadows. Muhin had crushed Bungo's lackeys so ruthlessly they would be bedridden for a fortnight. Dobo froze in disbelief. How could a trash like Muhin, who lacked an energy core, unleash such devastation? A wicked grin slowly spread across Dobo's face as he began to concoct a sinister surprise for the upcoming deathmatch. He licked his lips in anticipation, eager to see exactly what hidden fangs Muhin would bear when they finally crossed swords. Back in the training hall, Muhin pushed his physical vessel through a living hell, seeking power beyond limits. He realized his body, blessed by the heavens, could withstand punishment that would kill a normal man. He would break every barrier. With his mind cleared and preparations complete, the true cultivation began in earnest. He hoisted the 50-kilogram iron sword. As he swung the behemoth, the ancient wisdom of his old master echoed in his mind. The first form was mastered in a heartbeat. Without pausing for breath, he instantly ascended to the second form. Conquer all weapons, and victory is yours. The strain throbbed in his muscles, but he gritted his teeth, forcing his body to endure the agony. Before long, the impossible weight vanished, and he found himself wielding the massive blade as if it were a feather, leaping across the room in a dance of steel. He shifted into the third form. Simultaneously, he focused every ounce of his will to condense his internal energy to its absolute peak. To sharpen his instincts, he had rigged the room with deadly traps to simulate the chaotic frenzy of actual combat. The first test began. A solid iron ball assaulted him. He dodged the initial strike, only to be hammered from his blind spot. Next came the spiked bamboo trap. Unleashing the fourth form, his blade became a blur of destruction, slicing through the timber like paper. His swordsmanship appeared simple to the untrained eye, yet it harbored a lethal edge capable of severing anything in existence. But the flying logs were too fast. The fourth form failed him, forcing him to evolve to the fifth form in a split second. With a thunderous crash, he unleashed the fifth form, reducing every single log to splintered dust. Power surged through his veins. He realized that against absolute strength, numbers were meaningless. Nothing could stand in his way. Next, the candle trial. Employing the sixth form, he slashed with such precision that the wind pressure alone snuffed out every flame instantly. The house could no longer contain him. He stepped into the open air to unleash the catastrophic power of the seventh form. Channeling the seventh form, his movements became a rising storm, escalating with every breath. He pushed through to the ninth form. His resolve hardened into a single truth. There was nothing in heaven or earth his sword could not cut. Reaching the pinnacle, Muhin collapsed, gasping for air. He couldn't replicate his past life's glory yet, but the fire of ambition still burned bright. His mind drifted back to the days of his youth, remembering the lessons he had foolishly ignored. Back then, he had dismissed the old man's wisdom, never taking the sacred teaching seriously. Cutting the world with a sword? He had thought his master was mocking him with fairy tales and impossible feats. "I know it sounds like madness," his master had confessed, "but I cannot let my rival's legacy fade into the dust of history." Since he couldn't master it himself, the burden fell to Muhin to inherit the sword art of the only man who ever stood as his master's equal. And the most terrifying part? That legendary swordsman possessed absolutely zero internal energy. Muhin's master speculated that the rival might have been using a lost movement art to compensate for his lack of chi. The rival's own sect failed to grasp the essence, so he taught it to Muhin's master, hoping a worthy successor would eventually rise. Hearing this absurdity, young Muhin had thrown his head back and roared with mocking laughter at the arts, but times thwack asterisk. His master's fist descended like a meteor, nearly cracking his skull open for the disrespect. "You will obey." Terrified, Muhin had no choice but to bow to his master's tyranny and accept the mission. Swing it 1,000 times, your body evolves. Swing it 100,000 times, and your spirit will merge with the steel. But if you swing it 1,000,000 times, you will become a god of the sword, untouchable by any mortal. Muhin was stunned, doing the math. Even at 1,000 swings a day, it would take 3 grueling years to complete the cycle. Skeptical, Muhin had asked, "Was this friend truly as strong as you, master?" The old man's eyes darkened. "I don't know, but if we had fought to the death, only one of us would be breathing today." This piqued Mujin's interest. He couldn't help but wonder, just what kind of monster was his master's old friend? But reality came crashing back. Mujin was jolted awake by a series of crisp, stinging slaps from Suk. The bitter truth settled in. He had collapsed after a single repetition. With a goal of 1,000 swings, the path to power looked like an impossible mountain to climb. Still, a warrior needs fuel. But as he stared at the feast before him, his brow furrowed. It was pork. Disappointment washed over him. He ordered Suk to secure beef for the next meal. To rebuild this frail vessel into a weapon, he needed the highest quality protein for bulk. He told Suk to burn through the funds they borrowed from the beggar sect without hesitation. After all, extracting more gold from them later would be child's play. His strategy was simple but expensive. A strict diet of premium beef until the day of his life or death duel against Dobo. Suk couldn't hold back his confusion any longer. When exactly had his young master mastered these arts? He was certain the old Mujin had never trained a day in his life. Since he had already entrusted the secret to his siblings, Mujin decided there was no harm in letting his loyal servant into the fold. With a serious gaze, he dropped the bombshell. He was not the Mujin they knew. His true identity was none other than the legendary Divine Demon. Suk just stared at him blankly. He assumed his master was cracking a joke or spewing some martial arts fantasy nonsense. The servant's worry deepened. He feared his master was losing his mind, terrified that Mujin's memories were fading into oblivion. But Mujin silenced those fears with a vow. He wasn't going anywhere until he transformed this crumbling family into the mightiest clan in all of Sichuan. Besides, it wasn't like the former supreme being had anything better to do in this second life. Suk made the mistake of mocking his master's delusions, earning him a painful flick to the forehead that rattled his skull. Their conversation concluded, Mujin dismissed him. Suk bowed and retreated, leaving the master to his thoughts. Meanwhile, shadows moved in the background. The clan elders were plotting to flee with the children, convinced that Mujin would be slaughtered by Dobo, leaving the clan ripe for the picking. Back in the training hall, Mujin poured his soul into the steel. He was determined to wield the massive 150-pound blade with a single arm. Yet, his form trembled. His foundation was weak and the clock was ticking. Only 1 week remained before the duel that would decide their fate. Sweat poured from his body like rain. As he gasped for air, the training hall doors creaked open, revealing the worried faces of the children. Mujin tried to shoo them away for their own safety, but they refused to leave. They had watched him push his body to the brink of collapse for days and couldn't bear the silence any longer. Sion's eyes were filled with tears. She was terrified that her brother was destroying himself because of her harsh words. She confessed that she never meant to hurt him. It was just the anger speaking in the heat of the moment. Looking at these innocent souls, a memory sparked within the protagonist. They reminded him painfully of the sworn brothers he had lost in his previous life. A rare gentleness softened his gaze. He patted their heads, assuring them that everything was under control. Cheered up, the kids began playfully mimicking his martial stance, praising his Watching them bicker over the correct posture triggered another flashback. It was just like the grueling days of his past, suffering under the watchful eye of his own master. Sudden realization struck like lightning. The secret wasn't just physical strength, it was the breathing technique required to wield the heavy sword. Armed with this epiphany, Mujin's confidence soared. He promised the children absolute victory and ushered them back to their rooms. Although worry still lingered in their hearts, they chose to believe in their brother's strength. Alone once more, Mujin synchronized his breath with his movement. He swung the massive blade, channeling the rhythm of the universe. It worked! The breathing technique acted as a key, unlocking his dantian and allowing him to unleash all his accumulated internal energy in a single, explosive burst. Enlightenment dawned upon him. He finally grasped the essence of the movement arts, a divine method of cultivating internal energy through the kinetic flow of the body. In the martial world, these were often dismissed as third-rate techniques, ignored by the arrogant elites. But in the hands of a true master, they became legendary. With the breathing technique perfect, Mujin could now swing the colossal sword as if it were a feather. He possessed enough raw power to pulverize a stone statue into dust. Elsewhere, Elder Jabong cornered Suk, questioning Mujin's sudden transformation. Suk tried to claim it was the result of a medicinal pill, but the cunning elder wasn't buying the lie. With a snake-like grin, he ordered Suk to report every single movement the young master made. Suk rushed back to the training grounds, only to find his master collapsed, face down on the floor. Panic turned to confusion when Mujin spoke. He wasn't injured, he was annoyed. The training room was simply too cramped to contain his growing power. He needed space. Space to unleash hell. Mujin declared he would take over the main martial hall. As he stepped into the grand hall, the air grew heavy. The other warriors stopped their drills, their eyes locking onto the intruder with mixed disdain and curiosity. Suk stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly as he announced that the young master required the entire hall for himself. Everyone else had to leave. Murmurs of discontent erupted. Why should they, the able-bodied warriors, yield to a walking corpse who looked like he had one foot in the grave? They scoffed at him. In their eyes, simply dragging a heavy sword around didn't make this sick boy a martial artist. Mujin sensed the shift in the atmosphere instantly. The hostility was palpable, and a cold smile touched his lips as he addressed the tension. The other warriors were thirsting for a fight, but squad leader Cheol ordered his men to clear the hall, convinced that the young master had simply lost his mind once again. But before he could retreat, Muhin halted Cheol with a voice that cut through the air, challenging him to stand his ground and speak like a true man. Cheol paused, and Muhin threw down the gauntlet, demanding a duel between swordsmen. Cheol scoffed at the provocation, refusing to draw his blade against the future clan leader out of a misplaced sense of duty. Muhin sneered, branding him a spineless coward who hid behind titles because he lacked the strength to back up his words. That insult shattered Cheol's restraint. His killing intent flared as he finally unsheathed his weapon, ready to teach Muhin a painful lesson. As the duel commenced, Muhin did the unthinkable. He drove his own blade into the stone floor and launched a fearless, bare-handed assault, palming Cheol's face before the warrior could even blink. The onlookers gasped, completely baffled by this bizarre display of martial arts that seemed to abandon the way of the sword. Muhin danced around his opponent with blinding speed, toying with the squad leader, while Cheol swung wildly at empty air. Frustration boiled over for Cheol, and he roared at Muhin to stop mocking him and fight with the dignity of a warrior. Finally, Muhin gripped his hilt, his gaze turning icy cold, but Cheol wasted no time screaming that Muhin was the curse that had brought their clan to ruin. Believing Muhin was a disgrace to their bloodline, Cheol declared that such a failure had no right to cultivate the sacred arts. Cheol lunged with a lethal strike, but he was intercepted by the terrifying ninth form of the peerless sword technique, a blow that rattled his very soul. Muhin offered no mercy, giving Cheol absolutely no room to breathe as he delivered a bone-shattering punch directly to the face. Cheol was sent flying, blood spraying across the hall as Muhin's cold presence announced that the era of weakness was over. As his body slammed against the cold stone, a bitter truth dawned on Cheol. The young master was no longer the fool he once knew. A scorching aura of determination radiated from Muhin, a pressure far more intense than anything he had possessed before. The impact shook the floorboards, leaving Suk and the other warriors trembling in the wake of such raw power. Panic erupted as the warriors rushed to their fallen leader, who lay unconscious in a pool of total defeat. Muhin stood tall like a conqueror, daring anyone to challenge the result. But a foolish subordinate cried out, accusing him of using underhanded tricks. Barely conscious, Chael roared at his man to shut his mouth, swallowing his pride to admit that he had been completely outmatched. Bowing his head, Chael offered his sincere respect to Muhin, acknowledging the profound gap in their abilities. Muhin accepted the gesture and dismissed them, ordering Suk to follow the warriors out so he could meditate in solitude. Outside, the aggrieved warrior kept whining, convinced that Chael had gone soft on the young master, but Chael corrected him. Grimly, he had fought with lethal intent and still lost. The subordinate struggled to accept it, but Chael insisted that while they didn't know the method, the young master's martial prowess had grown exponentially. Meanwhile, Suk was lost in thought, wondering when exactly Muhin had undergone such a monstrous transformation, yet silent gratitude filled his heart for this newfound strength. Under the cover of darkness, the two elders convened to discuss the looming duel. They had served the clan for over 36 years with unwavering loyalty. They reminisced about the golden age of the Flame Emperor, recalling the sheer magnificence of his prime. He was a prodigy whose martial arts were so profound that even the mighty Tong clan had been forced to recognize his supremacy. Mesmerized by that legendary strength, the elders had sworn their eternal allegiance to him all those years ago. Elder Yo felt the sting of betraying that oath, but Elder Duo argued coldly that the failing lineage left them no choice. Duo pointed out that they had protected Muhin for 17 long years, watching the clan crumble into dust despite their efforts. They convinced themselves they had paid their dues, believing even the Flame Emperor would forgive them from the afterlife. They had already embezzled enough funds to escape and hired mercenaries to secure their departure. Duo urged Yo to flee first with the assets, while he remained behind to keep up appearances with Muhin a little longer. It turned out the duel's witness would be a martial master from the rival sect, a clear sign of corruption. Yo was horrified. The involvement of the merchant group meant this was a rigged game designed to wipe them out. These villains intended to erase the Jua clan from history. Duo instructed Yo to take the children and wait at the rendezvous point, knowing the betrayal would devastate them. Later that day, Muhin noticed his recovery meal was missing its usual portion of meat, prompting him to demand an explanation from Suk. Suk revealed the steward was choking their budget, and though Muhin was irritated by the disrespect, he was distracted when Suk proudly displayed a new outfit. Muhin ruthlessly crushed Suk's vanity, deadpanning that he looked much better when his face was covered in bandages. The hour of destiny had finally arrived. As Mujin stepped out to face his fate, he found Du waiting in the shadows outside the house. Mujin braced himself, expecting interference. But Du wasn't there to stop him. He revealed he was there to walk the path of war alongside him. He realized Du was consumed by worry. But Mujin? He only had one plan, to crush his rival's bones into dust. With resolve set in stone, Sok and Do fell into step behind their leader. The march to the arena began. The arena was a cauldron of noise. Every seat was packed with bloodthirsty spectators and gamblers hoping to make a fortune on the violence. Money flowed like a river. Given the overwhelming odds, the masses were betting blindly on the favorite, driven by greed. Then, the man himself arrived. But with a lollipop casually in his mouth? The crowd scoffed, instantly regretting their bets on such a pathetic-looking figure. Stepping onto the killing floor, he faced Choi Dian. The arrogant question hung in the air. Do you truly have the guts to go through with this? The crowd devoured the narrative. They believed the trash of the clan had begged for this duel, and that his madness had finally sealed his doom. Mujin was absolutely livid. He realized they had twisted the truth, painting his group as the villains. For that slander, he vowed they would pay 1,000-fold. Mujin's voice cut through the noise with lethal confidence. He wouldn't stand idly by while they stole his clan's secret manual. That was the reason he stood there, ready to spill blood. A gasp rippled through the stands. Merchants hunting for secret martial arts techniques? The crowd had never expected such underhanded greed. But Choyan remained arrogant. She believed Mujin was just posturing and would soon pay the ultimate price for his insolence. The atmosphere was electric. The preparations were complete. There was no turning back now. The announcer's voice boomed. The witness for this blood feud would be none other than the Great An of the Canton sect. He stood high on the balcony, radiating an overwhelming aura of authority, there to enforce the will of his master. His command was simple yet absolute. Dobo and Mujin were to fight with honor under the watchful eyes of the world. Suddenly, Dobo dropped a psychological bombshell. That martial suit Mujin was wearing, Dobo claimed he sent it personally as a funeral shroud for Mujin's inevitable death. Mujin simply smirked at the taunt. He drew his massive greatsword, declaring that Dobo would be the one needing a refund when this was all over. The entire stadium froze in shock. No one had ever witnessed a duelist wield a blade of such monstrous proportions. It defied all logic. The legend of the Emperor of the Flame was built on bare-handed martial arts, not heavy steel. Even Du was rattled, frantically asking Sok if Mujin had lost his mind. They had begged him to run. In their eyes, victory against such a monster was a mathematical impossibility. But Sok's eyes held a glimmer of faith. While Do trembled, Sok whispered that the impossible might just happen. The gong shattered the silence. Enraged, Mujin launched himself at Dobo the instant the fight began. He swung the colossus of a sword. A strike carrying the weight of a mountain descended upon his enemy. Dobo barely evaded death. The blade smashed into the arena floor, pulverizing the stone. The spectators lost their minds. Who knew Mujin possessed such terrifying speed? The rumors of his weakness shattered in an instant. He wasn't just moving, he was dancing with destruction. Cold sweat trickled down Dobo's back. This was supposed to be an execution, not a battle for survival. Mujin gave him no room to breathe. He charged again like a raging bull. Steel sang through the air. Dobo managed a desperate block, and the two warriors locked eyes in a stalemate of raw power. The sound of impact echoed like thunder. It was a glorious, terrifying sight to behold. Up in the stands, Choi's jaw dropped. Mujin was surviving far longer than her calculations predicted. Yet, arrogance blinded her. She remained convinced that no amount of training could bridge the gap between a genius and a nobody. Mujin's greatsword cleaved the air again, but Dobo's flexibility was snake-like. He slipped past the guard and landed a vicious counterattack, sending Mujin reeling back. Dobo smirked. He was certain that blow was enough to shatter any man's will to fight. On the balcony, Do couldn't believe his eyes. Mujin was actually holding his ground against a master. Then Sok leaned in with a dark grin. "You haven't seen anything yet. He hasn't even played his trump card." Do thought it was madness. But Sok revealed the truth. He had witnessed Mujin's secret training in the shadows. A storm was coming. As the dust settled, Mujin analyzed the situation. His strength was currently equal to Dobo's. It made him question the efficiency of his hellish training. But fear? It didn't exist in his heart. It didn't matter how strong the opponent was. Victory was his birthright. This time, he wouldn't just win. He planned to slaughter Dobo right there. Meanwhile, far away, Yo arrived at the destination carrying the sleeping burden of Mujin's brothers. Dole made his intentions chillingly clear. He lingered behind for one reason only: to scrape up whatever scraps of Muhin remained once Dobo finished slaughtering him. Whether their path was righteous or wicked remained to be seen, but there was no turning back now. Back in the arena, the atmosphere was suffocating. The duel between these two warriors raged on with intensified ferocity. Mujin remained unmoved, his eyes cold as ice. To him, Dobo was nothing more than an amateur playing with fire. They traded blows in a blur of motion, but whispers, mockery spread through the stands like a plague. The crowd jeered, claiming the so-called challenger was nothing special after all. Suddenly, the air cracked. Dobo unleashed a devastating strike, aiming to end Muhin's life in a single breath. Du and Sok watched in paralyzed horror, their hearts hammering against their ribs. All they could do was offer silent prayers to the heavens that he would somehow survive. But Muhin's gaze sharpened. In the face of death, he unveiled the legendary art, the first form of the 9 peerless swords. The preemptive step, Dobo's strike landed, but it met an impenetrable wall. Muhin blocked the lethal blow with terrifying ease, leaving the entire stadium in stunned silence. Even Dobo's arrogance shattered in that instant. Trembling from the impact, he was forced to retreat. Realizing he was facing a monster, Dobo desperately gathered every ounce of his internal energy. He prepared to unleash a final, desperate technique. However, a cruel sneer curled on Muhin's lips. He mocked his opponent, declaring his energy cultivation was pitifully slow. Without mercy, Muhin activated the second form. He surged forward like a demon from hell, his killing intent suffocating the arena. Dobo felt the Reaper's scythe at his neck. He frantically raised his guard, his mind reeling in confusion. How could he be losing to someone like this? He poured his very soul into the defense, but it was useless. With a sickening crack, his steel blade shattered like glass before his very eyes. Muhin's blade did not stop there. It sliced through the air and tore into Dobo's flesh with a spray of crimson. The impact hurled Dobo into the dirt. A piercing scream tore through the crowd as Choi Dion cried out his name in sheer desperation. Dobo lay broken in a pool of his own blood. His right arm was severed completely. The duel was over. The victor was decided. Coldly, Muhin walked over to the severed limb. He declared he would take it as down payment for a grudge held for 17 long years. Choi Dion froze in horror at his ruthlessness. Muhin scoffed, suggesting their wealthy merchant group could perhaps buy a way to reattach it. Suddenly, and leaped from the stands to Choi rushed to his side as well, but the news was devastating, and revealed that Dobo's energy core had been utterly destroyed. Anne glared at the victor, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. He demanded to know if such brutality was truly necessary. Muhin feigned innocence, asking what the old man meant, but Anne snapped back, pointing out the vast gap in their skills. The fight had been decided long before the final blow. Muhin's expression darkened. He noted that for someone with such a big mouth, the old man certainly had a lot of excuses. He then posed a chilling question. Was it necessary, back then, to use the 7 wounds punch on a defenseless 5-year-old child, eyes burning with the fires of hell? Muhin stared, Anne down. He proclaimed that this carnage was merely the closing act of a vendetta brewed for 17 years. He vowed that the debt was nowhere near paid. Retribution for everything done to the Jua clan was only just beginning. With venom in his voice, he warned Ain and his lackeys to prepare themselves for war. Choi Un collapsed to her knees, sobbing in anguish, swearing she would never forget this atrocity. As Muhin descended from the stage, the crowd erupted. They roared in approval, captivated by the absolute dominance he displayed. It wasn't just violence they had witnessed. It was art. They realized they had just seen a sword technique that had vanished from history. The murim world buzzed with excitement. A new grandmaster had risen. Du and Sok scrambled to meet their leader, and Muhin signaled it was time to return home. But as he walked away, he stopped cold. He turned to Du, asking if the gold he entrusted to him was gone. Sweat trickled down Du's brow as he nervously replied that a small amount remained. Muhin nodded thoughtfully. He decided they would pay a visit to the Bango sect. It seemed he needed to make a heavy withdrawal. His tone shifted, becoming deadly serious. He told Du that he didn't care if the mercenaries chose to leave, but if anyone dared to touch his brothers. The killing intent radiating from him was so intense, it nearly stopped Du's heart right there in its chest. Meanwhile, chaos erupted elsewhere. The younger siblings were screaming at Yo, furious that they were dragged away from watching their big brother's legendary duel. Yo's face went pale. A carrier pigeon had just delivered the news. Muhin had won. Against all odds, the monster had triumphed. The letter from Du was urgent. Their cover was blown. They had to return to the safe house immediately. Terrified for his life, Yo turned the cart around. While the children cheered about seeing their brother, Yo trembled, knowing the danger awaiting them. Later, Muhin declared it was time to confront the Bango sect. He told the old man to put his mind at ease. Even though he recognized Muhin's monstrous strength, Du begged him. He urged him not to entangle himself further with the dark underbelly of the sects. But Muhin simply smirked, realizing the old man was overthinking. He dismissed the warning, assuring him that he wouldn't go too far. With his destination set, Muhin marched straight toward the Bango sect, though Sok followed with trembling knees, terrified that this reckless visit would end in a bloodbath. Muhin, however, had no patience for cowardice. He declared that time was wasting and ordered his companion to stick to his shadow like a second skin. In a flash, they breached the sect's entrance, leaving Ma completely thunderstruck, as if he were seeing a ghost return from the grave. Muhin didn't waste a breath on pleasantries. He announced he was there to collect his dues, while ruthlessly mocking the desolate, empty state of their once proud hall. Desperate to save face, Ma stammered out an excuse, claiming the region's warriors had only cleared out to witness the legendary duel between Muhin and Dobo. But Muhin saw right through the lies. If everyone had gone to watch the fight, then surely. He pierced Ma with a sharp gaze, asking the one question that mattered. Did they run a betting pool on his life? It was obvious. The odds against Muhin must have been astronomical, meaning the house had raked in a mountain of gold from his victory. Since their pockets were now overflowing, Muhin's eyes gleamed with predatory greed. Ma instantly realized he was about to be squeezed dry. Terrified of provoking the monster before him, Ma quickly promised a hefty expression of gratitude. Muhin smirked, for the universal language of the martial world was, after all, gold. But suddenly, the air turned frigid. Ma felt a bone-chilling pressure radiating from Muhin, a suffocating aura drenched in pure, unadulterated killing intent. With eyes like cold steel, Muhin demanded to see the boss. Ma flinched, stuttering in confusion as to why this demon wanted an audience with the sect leader. Bam! Muhin slammed his hand down, splintering the table. He growled that his patience was thin, and he hated repeating himself to deaf ears. Just as Muhin's rage was about to boil over, the doors creaked open, and sect leader Choi finally stepped into the suffocating atmosphere of the room. Muhin blinked, genuinely taken aback not by the man's power, but by the sheer ugliness of the face that greeted him. Choi admitted his subordinates had already briefed him on the intruder, but Muhin just scoffed, asking why a third-rate leader was playing hard to get. He cut straight to the insults, mocking Choi's hideous appearance, before shifting his gaze to the dangerous presence lurking in the leader's shadow. A wave of pure malice washed over the room. It was Black Crow, an elite enforcer from the notorious Dark Sect. Black Crow stepped forward, scolding Muhin for his arrogance. He warned that a nobody should know better than to extort money when a member of the Dark Sect was present. Muhin didn't even flinch. He simply looked the man dead in the eye and told him to shut his mouth unless he was in a hurry to die. Enraged by the disrespect, Black Crow roared and launched himself at Muhin, ready to tear the boy limb from limb. But to Muhin, this was a joke. He felt zero threat from this so-called elite. His resolve to crush any obstacle was absolute. With a flick of his wrist, Muhin launched a simple chopstick. It flew like a bullet, piercing clean through Black Crow's hand. The enforcer froze, realizing too late that he wasn't dealing with. Muhin smirked, taunting him, saying he didn't need praise from a piece of trash. That insult snapped the last string of Black Crow's sanity. Screaming in fury, he charged again, abandoning all defense for a kill shot. Muhin decided to meet him head-on. He rushed forward, but just before impact, he vanished into thin air like a phantom. Before Black Crow could blink, Muhin materialized behind him. The enforcer swung wildly, but Muhin danced around the attacks, making it painfully clear he was just toying with his prey. Cold sweat poured down Black Crow's face. He couldn't comprehend how a mere brat was dancing circles around his ultimate techniques. Bored with the game, Muhin decided it was time to teach this fool a permanent lesson. In a blur of motion, he drove a chopstick deep into Black Crow's left eye. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the hall, freezing everyone who watched in horror. Black Crow collapsed to his knees, clutching his ruined face. He cursed Muhin, screaming that the entire dark sect would hunt him down for touching one of their own. Muhin just laughed. He kicked the Wailing Man in the head, daring him to send the whole army. He was curious to see if they could actually entertain him. Leaning in close, voice dropping to a whisper, Muhin clarified one thing. The sect might come later, but Black Crow wasn't leaving this room alive today. The reality of death shattered Black Crow's pride. The tough act vanished, replaced by desperate, pathetic begging. He pleaded with Muhin, swearing on his life that he would give up everything, anything, just to see another sunrise. Muhin raised an eyebrow, surprised the man had no backbone. But since wealth was offered, he decided to stay his hand for now. Black Crow stammered that his fortune was stashed in the capital, but swore to retrieve it. Muhin accepted the deal with a chilling reminder, come back empty-handed and you die. With terror fueling his legs, Black Crow scrambled out of the room, vowing to return at lightning speed to save his own skin. With the nuisance gone, Muhin slowly turned his gaze to sect leader Choi, who was already trembling so hard he had wet himself. It was time to settle the debt. Choi instantly dropped to his knees, his forehead slamming against the floor as he begged for mercy. He promised to hand over all his assets, but Muhin let out a dark laugh. He reminded Choi that a dead man owns Nani his property was already forfeited. Choi looked up in confusion, unable to process his fate. Muhin's eyes narrowed as he began to list the man's crimes. He tallied up the blood money squeezed from commoners and the clans destroyed by Choi's manipulation. The price of those sins was high. Tears streamed down Choi's ugly face as he offered everything, but his bargaining only fueled Muhin's disgust. With a swift, brutal strike, Muhin crushed the man's skull, silencing him forever. Absolute terror gripped the remaining witnesses as the body hit the floor. All eyes are fixed on the scene as Muhin turns his cold gaze to the crowd, asking, who dares to hold authority here now? The deputy leader scrambles forward in a panic, dropping to his knees and begging for his life with zero dignity remaining. He swears a blood oath to live a righteous life if spared. Sensing the truth in his desperate plea, Muhin decides to grant him this one mercy. But mercy has a price. Muhin demands the total valuation of the sect's assets, and the deputy starts listing them, beginning with the real estate. He stammers that the property is worth 4,000 gold, the assets of Banju are 10,000 gold, plus a tribute of 500 gold from the Sosal sect. In total, it is a massive fortune. Muhin's eyes gleam as he declares that every single coin is to be transferred to him. The deputy vows to prepare the transfer immediately. Muhin smiles. He appreciates efficiency and wants this wealth secured without a second of delay. But the moment the deputy flees, Muhin's killing intent returns. He glares at the remaining officers with eyes like a reaper and tells them to start negotiating for their lives. The officers are paralyzed with shock. Muhin reminds them coldly that his promise of mercy was for the deputy alone. Terror consumes their souls. They hit the dirt instantly, wailing and begging for a salvation that might never come. Shortly after, Muhin returns to base, hauling chests overflowing with loot. Elder Do is flabbergasted when he learns each box holds nearly 400 gold. However, Elder Do's joy is dampened by fear. He trembles, reminding Muhin that the Bango sect is backed by the monstrous Social sect. But the true nightmare isn't even the sect itself. It is the powerful figures allied with them. A terrifying warrior named Yusagan looms in the shadows. Do adds that they also command the infamous Black Crow and Red Crow assassins. At the mention of the Black Crow, Muhin scoffs dismissively. He informs Do that he has already disposed of that trash. Do's jaw drops. Muhin warns him not to compare a dragon to a worm. Anyone who comes looking for trouble will end up 2 meters underground. With the threat dismissed, his demeanor shifts. He orders Do to fetch the finest beef, ensuring his brothers feast like kings upon their return. As the young master turns to walk away, Elder Do stands frozen, his mind unable to process the reality. To think that Muhin has already struck fear into the Black Crow, a name that terrorizes the entire region, is unbelievable. In that moment, Du realizes that the boy he once knew is gone. A true ruler has taken his place. Meanwhile, Choyeon makes her move. She hires a squad of ruthless assassins to slaughter everyone, with orders to bring only one child back alive. Flashback to the Golden Age. The Flame Clan was once a titan of the martial world, led by the legendary Flame Emperor who commanded the admiration of all. His power was so absolute that he even received praise from the prestigious Tank Clan of Suwon. In a single generation, the Flame Clan rose to become a martial force that no power under the heavens dared to ignore. Even the so-called elite martial artists would think twice before crossing paths with the Flame Clan. Back then, the citizens of Sihong would erupt in passionate cheers whenever a clan member simply walked down the street. However, when the Flame Emperor fell, the successor proved to be utter trash. Like a fire without fuel, the glorious clan began a steep and tragic decline. Those who had sworn loyalty to the family grew disillusioned and abandoned the sinking ship one after another. The image of the emperor who once ruled the world split into legend and memory. Yet, the fact remains. He was an extraordinary man. Now, witnessing the immense aura Muhin radiates as he walks, the elders cannot help but see the shadow of the late emperor superimposed on his back. Suddenly, the peace is shattered. Wounded warriors stumble in, screaming that they have been ambushed by assassins. They gasp out that Elder Yo and a small group of warriors are the only ones left holding the line against the killers. The moment Du hears this, his blood runs cold. He realizes the two young masters are in mortal danger. Notify Muhin immediately. Du roars the order to the warriors and sprints ahead toward the battlefield. Deep in the forest, Elder Yo stands alone against the darkness. The warriors beside him have already been cut down. Even in the face of death, he stands like a mountain to protect the children. Just as he is about to be overwhelmed, Du bursts onto the scene. The assassins hiss in frustration. They were seconds away from completing their mission before this interference. The assassin leader screams at his men to slaughter both old fools, and the forest rings with the clash of steel once more. Elder Du trades blows with the fury of a tiger, but time is a cruel enemy. His age begins to catch up with him, and the assassins gain the upper hand. A blade slips past his guard. He takes a deep cut to the shoulder, forcing him to stumble back. Seeing an opening, one assassin targets Du while shouting to his comrades to kill one of the children now. He drives Du back with a flurry of strikes, forcing him into a desperate defense, but the old man refuses to yield. Moments later, steel bites deep. Du screams in agony as a vicious slash drops him to the earth, leaving him unable to lift his sword. With the guardian down, the assassins turn their cold eyes to the children, deciding which one will die and which one will be spared. Young Do-hin stood his ground. Though powerless, his spirit burned bright to protect his sister, but the assassins saw only easy prey to be slaughtered. Death was inches away until a thunderous voice shattered the silence of the forest, commanding them to freeze. Mujin charged toward them like a demon unleashed, a terrifying silhouette of pure vengeance closing the distance at godlike speed. Yet, these fools laughed in the face of death, still seeing Mujin as nothing more than the trash of the family. The bandit leader sneered, sealing their fate, and ordered his men to butcher the nuisance blocking their path. One thug lunged forward, eager for blood, but he merely became the first sacrifice to Mujin's awakening rage. With a single motion, steel shattered like glass. A vertical strike followed, cleaving the man in two before he could even scream. Mujin didn't pause. He stepped over the corpse, eyes locked on the rest. Panic finally set and the leader screamed for a formation, realizing they had provoked a beast. They swarmed him in a desperate wave, hoping numbers would save them, but it was futile. Mujin unleashed the fifth form of the 9 swords, the army decimation technique. He tore through their ranks as if they were made of wet paper. A sneaker attack? Pathetic. Mujin sidestepped with phantom grace and relieved the attacker of his head. Silence fell over the clearing as the last survivor finally realized the horrifying truth: he was facing a monster. Before he could blink, his right arm was severed and an agonizing shriek tore from his throat. Mujin's voice cut through the screams like ice. "Move 1 inch, and you join the dead." With the threat neutralized, Mujin turned. There was Do-hin, heroically shielding his sister's eyes from the grisly scene. "Fear not," Do-hin whispered, his voice shaking but firm. "Big Brother is here. He defeated the bad men." Mujin approached them, his aura softening as he asked if they were unharmed. Do-hin nodded bravely. Mujin sighed, suggesting they must have been terrified by the violence. But Do-hin shook his head. "I wasn't scared. I am the son of a martial master." Relief washed over Mujin, and he patted the brave boy's head with pride. He then turned to Elder Yo. "Take the wounded and the children back to the estate immediately." As they vanished into safety, Mujin's cold gaze returned to the maimed assassin. "Stop whimpering about your arm and listen." Mujin leaned in, his killing intent spiking. "Was it the Chunghwa merchant group that sent you?" The man hesitated. "Speak the truth," Mujin offered coldly, "and you might keep your head attached to your neck." Desperate to live, the assassin spilled everything. It was Choi Yan. He hired the Death Forest faction to do his dirty work. Secrets revealed. The wretch looked up with teary eyes. "You said you would let me go?" Mujin stared down at him, his eyes devoid of mercy. "Scram," Mujin spat. "Run back to Choi Yan, tell him I slaughtered his dogs, and tell him I am coming for his head next." Later, the streets fell silent, all eyes fixed on Mujin, striding through town drenched in the blood of his enemies. Those who once mocked him swallowed their words. No one dared meet the gaze of a man walking with death at his side. Whispers spread like wildfire. Had the fallen prodigy finally returned to reclaim his throne? Soaking in the fear and awe, Mujin arrived at the gates. Masak rushed out to greet him, but the young master was all business. Mujin brushed past the pleasantries, his mind still on the battle. "The wounded warriors," he demanded. "Are they in the medicine hall?" Masak confirmed it immediately. Masak added that the siblings were resting safely. Mujin finally exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Good. Prepare my bath." Moments later, he sank into the steaming water, washing away the gore of battle. His mind drifted to his siblings. He wanted to shield them from the darkness of the murim world. They were children of a martial clan, yes. But to see such carnage so young, it did not sit right with his soul. Or perhaps, was he simply projecting his own haunted past onto them? The next morning, Mujin found Elder Yo in the medicine hall. "I need the Red Flame art manual," he stated flatly. Elder Yo flinched, visibly shaken. Mujin raised an eyebrow. "Why the fear, Elder? Why do you need that?" Yo stammered. He feared the boy would relapse, that the power would drive him to madness again. Yo tried to deflect, but Mujin cut him off. "You are injured. I must train alone. I need the manual." Mujin saw the hesitation in the old man's eyes, the doubt in his ability. But Yo quickly denied it. "Relax, Elder," Mujin said with a calm confidence. "I will not lose control. I will not cause a scene." Sensing the shift in the boy's spirit, Elder Yo finally relented. He handed over the manual, entrusting the future to Mujin. Once Mujin departed, Elder Yo turned to Do, his voice trembling with unease. Had they made a grave error in trusting the sacred manual to the young man? But Do dismissed the fear instantly. Mujin had been displaying sword mastery that bordered on the divine lately. Without his blade, they would have been nothing but corpses during that assassination attempt. Furthermore, the young master's recovery was miraculous. The Taoist treatment seemed to be working wonders on his damaged meridians. Yo conceded the point, yet a question lingered in his mind. Was this medicine merely healing him, or was it enhancing his martial prowess as well? The sudden spike in Mujin's power was unnatural. He must have stumbled upon a fortuitous encounter. No other explanation made sense. Regardless of the cause, Elder Yo could finally breathe easy. The long twilight of their clan was finally giving way to a new dawn. Meanwhile, at the training grounds, Mujin summoned his siblings for a lesson. He laid out the core philosophy of their path. Their movements needed to flow like water, seamless and unbreaking. This wasn't just theory. It was a fundamental footwork technique he had forged in the fires of countless life-or-death battles. Awe washed over the two disciples as they listened to his wisdom. However, Iso broke the tension with a confused look. Didn't Elder Yo explicitly say Mujin had zero real combat experience? Duin looked at his sister in horror. He couldn't believe she just exposed their master like that. Mujin cleared his throat, deciding to skip the awkward explanations. He ordered them to attack him with everything they had, using only the basic fist technique. They took their stances and charged, but as they struck, a wave of profound disappointment crashed over Mujin. The display was pathetic. He had to wonder if these two were truly descendants of a martial arts bloodline. They didn't just lack skill, they lacked the very foundation required to call themselves martial artists. Frustrated beyond belief, he halted the spar immediately. He claimed a sudden headache forced him to end the session. The siblings exchanged confused glances. A headache? They hadn't even managed to touch a single hair on his head. Mujin quickly spun a lie to cover his tracks, claiming they were actually more skilled than he anticipated. He instructed them to focus solely on body conditioning. Until their vessels were strong, advanced techniques were useless. Once they left, the weight of reality settled on Mujin's shoulders. This was going to be a monumental challenge. He suddenly realized the hell his own master must have gone through trying to train him in the past. Nevertheless, he steeled his resolve. He would restore the clan to its former glory, fulfilling his penance for the downfall he caused. More than that, a fire burned within him. He would finally defeat the one rival who stood undefeated in his previous life. Mujin gripped his blade and began his solo cultivation. The heavy steel felt feather-light in his hands now. With every repetition of the sword forms, his velocity increased, his strikes becoming a blur. Days later, the subordinates returned. Masak reported their success, fishing for praise, but his greed for recognition was palpable. Mujin cut him off, his voice dripping with ice. Had he arrived even a second later, the consequences would have been catastrophic. He issued a chilling warning. One more foolish mistake, and their lives were forfeit. Terrified, the men bowed deeply, begging for forgiveness. Just then, a visitor arrived. It was Dunso, the so-called Taoist healer responsible for Mujin's treatment. Mujin recognized the scam artist instantly and hurled an insult before Masak could even finish the introduction. Masak frantically apologized to the guest, claiming the young master's mind was still addled from his injuries. Mujin kicked his subordinate out for spouting nonsense. Then a cunning smile touched his lips. He would play along for now. Changing his demeanor, Mujin politely invited the traveler inside, feigning concern for his fatigue. It reminded him of the report Masak gave days ago. This man claimed to inherit the sacred lineage of the Gudong sect. Supposedly, his positive healing energy saved Mujin's life of service, for which the head butler had paid an astronomical fortune. Back in the present, Mujin's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. He was thrilled to finally meet the swindler face to face as he ushered him into the compound. Mujin asked point blank if the rumors of his Gudong lineage were true. The man confirmed it with an air of arrogant calm. He boldly claimed to be the sole inheritor of the Gudong sect's true essence. Mujin froze. The atmosphere grew heavy as he asked if the man was truly the white immortal of Gudong, for he knew that lineage had ended long ago. The fraud attempted to play the fool, but Mujin's patience snapped. He gave the man one brief window to confess before mercy was off the table. The Taoist dared to question Mujin's gratitude, playing the victim. In response, cold steel sang through the air as Mujin drew his massive blade. He taunted Yansu, claiming that if he truly was a Taoist master, dodging a single strike should be child's play. Mujin's blade sang through the air. He missed the old fraud by a hair's breadth, but the sword force carved a massive gouge into the solid ground. Masak and the elders trembled in terror, convinced their young master had finally lost his mind to bloodlust. But Mujin silenced them with a sharp glare. He demanded water immediately, promising to show them a spectacle they would never forget. The moment the water arrived, Mujin didn't drink. Instead, he splashed the entire bucket straight onto the scammer's face. Yongo sputtered, trying to maintain his act. He dared to ask if this was how the clan treated a benefactor. Mujin ignored the complaints and yanked hard on the old man's long white beard. To everyone's shock, it tore right off. Even Zhang froze. The game was up. The undeniable proof of his deception dangled right in Mujin's hand. Muhin scoffed, inspecting the prop. He mocked the fraud for putting so much effort into gluing the fake hair to his chin. With the charade broken, Yongo found himself surrounded by hostile retainers. Maisik asked his master what punishment awaited the liar. Muhin's eyes turned cold. He mused that he had no intention of letting him go. Perhaps he would sever his limbs and remove his manhood as interest. Pure terror seized Yongo's heart. He fell to his knees, begging for mercy. Muhin smirked, assuring him that death was too easy because dead men cannot pay back debts. Muhin insisted that taking a few limbs seemed fair, but Zhang cried out in desperation, pleading to keep his body intact. He swore on his life. He promised to return every single coin he had swindled from them. Muhin accepted the deal, but with a twist. There would be a hefty service fee for the privilege of keeping his arms, legs, and dignity attached. Terrified of becoming a cripple, Yongo frantically agreed. He would pay any price just to walk away in one piece. Muhin turned to the victim. The old doctor revealed he had handed over 50 gold Nayang to the fraud. Muhin sighed heavily. He could barely believe how gullible the man had been to fall for such a cheap trick. The doctor stammered that Yang Su's reputation as a healer was legendary, but Muhin cut him off. The first order of business was retrieving that 50 gold. Yongo confessed his willingness to pay, but there was a catch. The stash was hidden back at his residence in Yinong. Muhin didn't hesitate. He ordered the fraud to lead the way to Jinong, a journey of 4 long hours. The retainers offered to provide backup, but Muhin waved them off. They were still recovering and would only slow him down. He commanded them to guard the estate and ensure no further trouble brewed in his absence. As he departed with the captive, the retainers sensed a shift. They urged each other to trust their young master. The weakling of the past was truly gone. Moments later, they reached Yongo's waiting transport. Muhin raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sheer opulence of the carriage. It was clear evidence that the business of deceit was booming. Stepping inside, Muhin was even more impressed. The cabin was lined with premium cotton and finished with the finest leather. Zhang boasted that it was custom-made. For a man who traveled constantly, absolute comfort was not a luxury, but a necessity. Muhin grinned, noting that for a crook, Zhang had an impressive work ethic. He teased the man, asking why he didn't apply such dedication to an honest trade. Yongo bowed his head low. Before Muhin, promising that he would turn over a new leaf and walk the righteous path from this day forward. Satisfied, Muhin leaned back into the cushions. He told the old fox he needed rest and ordered him to wake him only upon arrival. Yongo acknowledged the command, promising to wake him the second they reached their destination. But behind that submissive mask, venom brewed. Yongo couldn't wait to show this arrogant brat the consequences of crossing him. The carriage rolled on. Hours later, instead of a town, they rolled to a stop in the deathly silence of a secluded forest. Yongo slipped out to meet his accomplice, a hulking figure with the aura of a ruthless bandit. He whispered that their prey was sound asleep inside. With a cruel sneer, he ordered the bandit to drag the boy out and make a bloody example of him. The giant cracked his knuckles, eager for violence. He couldn't fathom why anyone would be foolish enough to mess with a Taoist's operation. The thug squeezed into the carriage, launching a devastating punch straight at the sleeping figure. But in a split second, Muhin moved. He spun, blocking the massive fist effortlessly with the scabbard of his sword. A demonic smile played on Muhin's lips as he asked if they had arrived. Disgusted by the ambush, he unleashed a wave of energy, blasting the thug right out of the carriage. The bandit hit the ground hard, pain vibrating through every bone in his body, and he scrambled up, realizing this was no ordinary target. The rumors were true. The kid's strength was the real deal. Muhin stepped out slowly, his presence dominating the clearing. He asked Zhang why their destination looked so much like an isolated grave. The truth clicked for Muhin. This man wasn't just a petty swindler. He was a predator with far darker schemes in mind. Mujin wasn't insulted, he was delighted. After all, he had been hunting for a chance to stretch his limbs and unleash some chaos. A terrifying aura erupted from Mujin's body, suffocating the air around them. He stared down the giant, challenging him to show his true worth. Crushed by Mujin's killing intent, the giant panicked. He roared for his brethren, realizing this was not a one-man job. 3 massive figures stepped from the shadows. Behold, the infamous 4 demons of Sansen had arrived on the battlefield. Mujin's sharp eyes instantly pierced through their facade. They were channeling demonic energy, a forbidden power, yet he chose to remain silent. Glancing at their arsenal, Mujin scoffed. He invited them to display the full depth of their martial arts, if they had any. In a blink, Mujin vanished. He reappeared right in front of the leader, forcefully isolating the brute from his pack. A storm of strikes rained down. The leader was instantly forced onto the defensive, barely able to track Mujin's movements. Realizing their boss was being toyed with, the others scrambled to intervene, but the leader was already crumbling under the heavy, bone-crushing impact of Mujin's assault. Every blow felt like being struck by a 1,000-pound warhammer. His stance broke. Seizing the moment, Mujin delivered a devastating kick to the face, shattering the giant's jaw in a spray of blood. Reinforcements arrived. A lethal axe swung for Mujin's neck, but he weaved effortlessly. A thunderous elbow strike to the gut followed, folding the attacker with an agonizing scream. The remaining 2 attempted a pincer formation to trap him. Mujin sidestepped with ghostly grace, causing them to overextend into empty air. A fatal mistake. Mujin seized the opening and slammed one demon into the earth with earth-shattering force. Now, only 1 remained. Mujin charged, and the terrified bandit raised his blade in a desperate attempt to defend against. The incoming strike. The steel weapon shattered like glass. Mujin's blade stopped mere inches from slicing the man in 2, showing terrifying control. Death stared him in the face. As the bandit trembled in horror, Mujin's foot connected with his chest, launching him across the battlefield like a rag doll. Dust settled on the total victory. The so-called 4 demons were now on their knees, gasping for air, utterly dominated. During the clash, Mujin confirmed his suspicions. They wielded the demonic arts. But how could such forbidden techniques exist here in the Central Plains? Mujin looked down on them. They were mere fledglings in the world of martial arts, and he had no desire to slaughter such weaklings. As he weighed their fate, the battered leader cried out, his pride shattered. He formally admitted their crushing defeat. He begged for mercy. Witnessing this, Zhang realized his situation had gone from bad to absolutely catastrophic. The 4 demons of Sansan had been crushed like ants. The leader confessed, trembling, that they knew Mujin was a monster far beyond their level after the very first exchange. Mujin's eyes narrowed coldly. If they knew the gap in power was heaven and earth, why did they continue their foolish resistance? Mujin offered a cruel mercy. He would spare their lives, but in exchange, he would shatter their energy cores and sever their meridians forever. Hearing that sentence, which was worse than death for a warrior, the leader slammed his head on the ground. He pleaded desperately, claiming they were merely pawns following orders. Mujin scoffed at their pathetic display. He told the man to cease his weeping. They were grown men, yet they wailed like children. Mujin demanded the truth. Who taught them? The bandit played dumb until Mujin made his intention clear. He wanted a face-to-face with their master. Their secret was out. Mujin revealed he had seen through their technique the distinct, albeit pathetic, trace of demonic energy. Who would teach such dark arts to these fools? The leader hesitated, then revealed a shocking truth. They did not even know their master's name. Fury flared in Mujin's eyes. What kind of worthless disciples didn't even know the name of the one who taught them? It was a disgrace to the martial world. The leader stammered out the explanation. The mysterious master remained anonymous and had strictly forbidden them from seeking out fellow students. Mujin shook his head. They should have kept their heads down and practiced standard techniques instead of descending into a life of banditry with half-baked power. The leader quickly interjected. They were many things, but they refused to be branded as common thieves. He insisted they were simply lending a hand to their sworn brother's business ventures. Mujin was taken aback. He scolded them. Harshly did they have no shame aiding a man like Zhang, knowing exactly what kind of filth he peddled? The truth came out, they actually believed Zhang was running a life-saving medical operation. Realizing their stupidity was genuine, Mujin decided to spare them, ordering them to stop being Zhang's lackeys immediately. But his voice dropped an octave, dripping with killing intent. If he ever caught them on the path of evil again, there would be no mercy next time. The leader bowed, thanking Mujin for his immense generosity. Mujin then slowly turned his gaze toward Zhang. The price for his life just went up drastically. He would pay for the mental stress he caused. Zhang turned pale, realizing his wallet and perhaps his sanity was about to be emptied. As Mujin's carriage departed into the sunset, a realization struck the four brothers like lightning. That man, he was the true master they had been waiting for. Adrenaline surging, they scrambled to their feet and chased after the carriage, desperate to stop it. Mujin stepped out, annoyed by the sudden halt. To his surprise, the four giants were prostrated before him, shouting "Boss" with absolute reverence. They swore a blood oath right then and there. They pledged their eternal loyalty, vowing to serve him as their lord until their final breath. The four of them begged Muhin to take them under his wing. However, Muhin totally misunderstands the situation. He assumes they are just crying in agony from the beating he delivered. He tries to brush them off, but their voices only grow louder. They demand that he take responsibility for them. And then they drop a shocking truth. Despite their looks, this revelation leaves Muhin completely thunderstruck. He had assumed they were old geezers this whole time. After all, with those rugged faces, who could blame him? Alright guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the story so far, make sure to comment next part down below. Also, please subscribe to the channel, ring that bell, and smash that like button. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Yeah.